What's up everyone, I'm Twisted. Lately, I've been playing a ton of Marvel Rivals with my friends, so I thought it would be fun to explore what role each league champion would fit in based on the roles present in Rivals. I'm taking inspiration from Dan Boy Wonder, who also did a similar video, but for Ben 10 Aliens. So, for those who aren't familiar with Marvel Rivals, its roster is divided into three classes. Vanguards, which are basically the tanks, Duelists, which are damage dealers, and Strategists, which are the healers or supports. However, there's a reason why the classes aren't just called tank or healer. It's so that some characters can blend the line between roles a little bit. For example, a strategist like Dagger has like 3 or 4 healing abilities, but Invisible Woman only has 1. However, she can shield allies, push and pull enemies and slow them, supporting her team in other ways. However, every strategist, at least so far, needs to have at least 1 healing ability, which is something we should keep in mind for later. Duelists are pretty straightforward, they are your equivalent to carries in League. Here I want to highlight Mr. Fantastic, whose DPS might be a bit lower than other duelists, but to compensate he has an ability that negates damage, a transformation that makes him more tanky, and an ability that gives a shield to himself and allies, clearly blurring the line between duelist and vanguard. And speaking of vanguards, those are pretty straightforward, tank damage, peel allies and a bit of crowd control. So without further ado, it's time to divide the League of Legends roster into these 3 roles. Alright, so let's do this. I think what I'm most afraid of is that this will be too simple. Like, League is a MOBA, so most champions already fit nicely into these 3 categories. However, not all do, so those will probably be the most interesting. Starting with Aatrox. Aatrox is a bruiser. I think they are called fighters in League. Whatever. Those will be interesting because I think I will have to divide them into either vanguards or duelists. And Aatrox, I think, is a vanguard. I think he will be in the middle of the enemy team, healing with his attacks, draining them, just sustaining a lot. Maybe a bit of CC with his sword swings. I can totally see him being a vanguard and not a duelist. However, he would be not as tanky as some of the other vanguards, and to compensate he would probably deal a bit more damage than the average vanguard. Ahri, so based on League and other games, Ahri would definitely be a duelist. However, I have a feeling that most League champions are going to end up in duelists. So, hear me out. In the Rune King game, she is the party's healer. She has a lot of damage abilities, but she also has some healing abilities. So, maybe, just maybe, she could be a strategist. Imagine she has at least 1 healing ability, but maybe she can put the Foxfire on allies, giving them more damage and more movement speed. Maybe. I might come back to Ahri later, but for now, I'm leaving her as a strategist because I think that's really interesting. Akali is a duelist. She's like your Genji, your Psylocke. I think this one is obvious. I don't see Akali being anything else but a duelist. She's going to throw kunai, dash around, maybe even use her smoke grenade the same way that Punisher uses his. That would be interesting. Action. Now, you could make Action a strategist if you really wanted to. I don't know if I want to. But the thing is, his main gimmick, what makes him stand out from the roster, is the fact that he revives allies. So, I'm going to leave him as a duelist, but I think he has potential to also be a strategist in this hypothetical League Rivals game. Alistar is a vanguard. I don't think we even need to discuss that. I think it's obvious. Ambessa, probably a duelist, but I could also see her as a vanguard. Again, bruisers are going to be the most interesting because most of them could fit into either role. However, I don't really see Ambessa as that much of a tank, that much of a soak damage frontline type character, and I also don't see her peeling for allies that much, so I think duelist makes sense. Now, a Mumu. The obvious choice would be to put him in Vanguard, right? You could make things up, say that, oh, maybe he steers heal allies, but thematically and based on the lore, that's actually the opposite of what he does. He literally damages everything that he touches, so I think making him a Vanguard makes sense. Now, Anivia. What if she's actually a strategist, right? She can raise walls, kind of like Sage from Valorant, kind of like Groot from Marvel Rivals, Mei from Overwatch, and in the lore she's supposed to be this spirit that guides people, that helps them through storms and stuff like that. So you could easily turn Anivia into a buff type support, giving damage buff or movement speed buffs to her allies could easily work, and she even has a revive passive like Adam. I think making her a strategist could work. But again, League is a MOBA, so almost every single champion could just easily be the role that they are in League, but we are here to have a bit more fun with it, to explore what other roles these champions could fit in a different game genre. Any. Now, you could put any on top of T-Birds and make them a Vanguard. That's probably stepping too much on the toes of Nunu and Willem though. And I also don't see her as a strategist. I know that she has a shield in League that she can use in allies, but I think Duelist makes the most sense. And T-Birds could either be like her ultimate or just a passive ability that she can summon after doing something, like after achieving a certain condition. I think that would be interesting. Aphelios, Duelist, I think most AD carries are just going to be duelists. I don't really see most of them in any other role. Like from their gameplay, their design, their personality, everything usually just fits into the damage category. Same thing goes for Ashe, though Ashe is a bit more supportive, I guess, but I also don't see how you could make her a strategist. I don't see her being like Anna from Overwatch, shooting people and healing them, so which is something I could see with Action, for example, but not for Ashe. Aurelion, so in this hypothetical game, cannon sizes probably not a thing. You could make him in either of these three roles, in my opinion. Like, he could be a Vanguard because he's a huge fucking dragon. He could be a Duelist because that's kind of his role in League. Or he could be a strategist just controlling space from the backline, you know, summoning those like galaxies and stars that he does, controlling areas and CCing enemies. I don't really know which one I would go with. I think making him a duelist is probably what makes more sense. He's a space dragon, you want to see him breathe fire and melt enemies, probably. But you could also do that with a Vanguard that maybe isn't as tanky. I don't know. Now, Aurora. Aurora could easily be a strategist, I think. I think it would even fit her personality and her lore. She's all about helping spirits, so it wouldn't be hard to come up with spells or magic that she does that heals people or buffs people. I think this could work. And I think the same goes for Azir. I know a lot of people would probably put Azir in Duelist because he's a mid laner, he's a carry. But what if instead of like summoning his soldiers to strictly do damage, what if he could also summon the soldiers to shield allies, to displace enemies, right? Like he does with his ultimate, but instead of a bunch of soldiers, just one. Think of something like Loki's clones that he places on the map, but instead of being clones of Loki, they are soldiers that can perform actions based on Azir's abilities. And Azir is also a general, if I'm not mistaken, so making him like buff allies, maybe give him like movement speed, again damage boosts with his sand powers could easily work. He could also like CC enemies, again with the sand powers, with the sand soldiers. I think making him a strategist would be really, really cool. And I think Bard would also be a strategist. Again, like ADCs, I think most support champions are going to be strategists, at least not the tanky ones. I don't really see Bard doing anything else, unless we come up with brand new abilities, but like, however, we could recontextualize his abilities for him to be a Vanguard, because he has a portal like Doctor Strange, he has a stun, he has a healing ability. I don't think any tank has an healing ability. In fact, I don't think in Marvel Rivals any character can like heal allies without being a strategist. I might be misremembering something. I know that they can like shield or give buffs, but healing I don't think can be done by a Vanguard. I think I'm making him a strategist. I think that makes sense. Alright, Bel'Veth, a bit more of like a carry like Viego and Master Yi and an actual bruiser. However, looking at her silhouette, I think it would be better to place her as a Vanguard, right? She's a huge like manta ray void creature. You could give her some kind of ability that makes her attack faster and faster. She could like consume the enemies that her team defeats, creating those fishes, those remora that she has. I don't know, I just see her as a good Vanguard. I don't really have much to say about her. And speaking of Vanguards, Blitzcrank is a Vanguard. I don't think there's any doubt about that. However, I want him to be more of a peeling Vanguard instead of full-on frontline taking damage and dealing damage. Because in the lore, Blitzcrank, at least in the old lore, now with Arcane we don't fucking know, but in the old lore, Blitzcrank was built to help people. We can't really put him as a strategist because I don't see how he would heal people, but we could tweak his Q, his rocket grab, so that he could also grab onto allies. Kind of like Tahm Kench's ultimate or Wonder Woman's lasso from Multiverses. So he could use his Q to hook people, like Winter Soldiers, like Road Dogg, etc. But he could also use it to save people, to save his allies from dangerous situations, stuff like that. I think that would be interesting. Besides that, I can see him like dealing damage around him, like electric damage around him, knocking up enemies, displacing them. I think that makes sense for Blitzcrank. Brand. Now, when I think of Brand in a game like this, I imagine him sorta like Iron Man. At least I have this image in my mind of that Rise comic where Brand is just flying, so I could see him just flying around shooting fire. I don't see him as a strategist. I don't think that fits his personality at all. A Vanguard, I don't think he has like the body type for that. But then again, Brand desperately needs a redesign, so who knows. But I think Duelist is what makes the most sense. And you can already see that most characters so far are Duelists. That's why I'm trying to put some of the carries in other categories. Now Braum. Braum is a Vanguard. Again, another peeling Vanguard. Makes sense. He's a support in League. He has the shielding ability like Reinhardt, like Doctor Strange. I think that's a very obvious role for him. Now, Briere, I hope I'm saying her name right, I always forget how it's pronounced. Probably a duelist, right? I'm trying to think if we could make her a Vanguard, but probably not. She would probably be like a Wolverine, right? Just go in, deal a bunch of damage, especially to tanks, and then leave. Or she could also just be a magic, going in with teleports and dashes, focusing the supports, and then trying to survive. Caitlyn, definitely a duelist. Again, ADC, not much to say here. Camille, I wanna put Camille in duelist. Like, she's an assassin. Not in League, but like in universe, she's basically an assassin. I think making her a Vanguard would be weird because she has like all of these attacks that involve her like swinging like blades on her legs, and then those attacks would like not deal that much damage. I think duelist is what makes the most sense for her. Again, another like magic type duelist. Now Cassiopeia, can we make her a strategist? I don't think so. Like, her powers are literally poison. That's it. She poisons and turns people into stone and throws snakes at them. Is that a thing that she does still? I think so, right? Yeah, I don't see how she could be a strategist, though she does have some utility, right? Like her ability of grounding enemies. Yeah, but I think I'm putting her as a duelist for now. Cho'Gath, Vanguard, that one is obvious. Corki, I also don't see him being a strategist or a Vanguard. I mean, Vanguard could work if we make his flying machine like bigger, bulkier, but I think that's better for like Rumble than Corki. Darius, I'm putting Darius as a Vanguard. I think his role is just to be in the front line as much as possible, soaking up damage, dealing damage, applying his passive to everyone. I think it makes sense for Darius to be a Vanguard. Diana, duelist, she's an assassin. She's, again, another magic type character in my mind. Goes in on the supports, focus them as much as possible, try to survive. Draven, again, another ADC. So far, I cannot think of a single ADC that I'm not going to put in duelist. That's just how it is. Mundo, Vanguard. Right? Vanguard. Not much to say here. He's a tank in League, fits perfectly as a Vanguard in this hypothetical game. Echo, same thing, an assassin. And if you think this is being a bit too simple, we get to Elise. Now, Elise is interesting because she is kind of an assassin in League, right? So we could put her in duelist. However, like in a third-person game, what would you actually do as Elise? I have a hard time like imagining her throwing like whatever it is that she's throwing in League. I don't even know what her projectiles are, like some kind of web magic, whatever. Why don't we make her a bit more of a strategist when she is in the human form, like throwing toxins, giving debuffs to enemies, and maybe when she's in the spider form, she's a full-on Vanguard, right? Just soaking up damage. Maybe she can have some kind of like poison that she applies in human form that later gives her a bonus or some kind of new effect when she's in spider form. I don't know. I think I'm putting her in Vanguard. Like, especially after seeing the cinematic, like seeing how huge her spider form is. I think that makes sense. We could also make her like a diva / Bruce Banner character, right? Where she can transform into the spider form, and when she dies in that form, she reverts back to human. I think that would be interesting, and I think it would be cooler than Small Diva or Bruce Banner, because when you are in those forms, there's no reason for you to want to be in those forms. You just want to get back to your tankier form as soon as possible. That's why I hate that in Marvel Rivals, when you die and revive while playing Hulk, you go back to Bruce Banner. Like, why would you want to go back to Bruce Banner? Especially when Hulk has the ability to traverse the map faster. It just doesn't make sense to revive as that character. I think in Elise, we could actually give her some tools that she uses while in the human form. Or we could just make it so that she can swap at any time or with an easier condition than those other characters. Evelyn. I don't see Eve being a Vanguard. I don't see her as a strategist. Assassin goes to duelist, I guess. And ADC goes to Duelist as well. I don't see Ezreal in any other role. Now, Fiddlesticks. I think we could make Fiddlesticks a Vanguard. Like, he could be like a drain tank. He could like place a bunch of his effigies around the map that could like fear enemies, crowd control them. No, controlling space and crowd controlling is a good thing for a Vanguard. He could be a strategist with like with the controlling space and crowd control, but how would Fiddlesticks heal allies? That doesn't, like, I'm not saying it's impossible, it just doesn't feel in character. That makes sense. Fiora is a duelist, in my opinion. Like, isn't her title literally the duelist or something like that? Just makes sense for this role. Fizz, again, assassin goes to duelist. I don't know what else to say here. Galio, Vanguard, more of a peeling Vanguard, I think would make sense for him. He does have his ultimate in League. I think basing his kit more around abilities like that, where he can like peel for his allies, would make a lot of sense for Galio as a character. Again, in League, he just has the ultimate, but maybe we can make it so like his E could also be used on allies, right? He could like dash to them to protect them, kind of like what Braum does in League with his W. I think Asante also has an ability like that. I think that could work for Galio in this game quite well. He could also like buff allies with his Q, which is something that he used to be able to do before his rework. Like in this new one, they gave him like these wind powers that don't fit that much. Like, how does Galio have wind powers? But we could expand on that and turn these wind powers into buffs that he could give to his team. Now, Gangplank. He has the physique to be a Vanguard, but I think Duelist makes the most sense. Placing barrels, setting up for combos, shooting people, slicing them, setting them on fire. Yeah, I think Duelist makes sense. And Garam is a Vanguard. If I could compare him to a Marvel Rivals character, probably Captain America is what comes to mind. Doesn't really have that much peel for his team, only for himself, but he could have like an ultimate where he inspires everyone around him. I think that would be more in character, more interesting than just summoning a giant sword, though you could also have that wherever. Now, Gnar. I said in the beginning of this video that Mr. Fantastic has an ability that lets him become more tanky, right? Could we do the same for Gnar, or is Gnar just a Nulk diva type character? Because Gnar has a spin on the idea, right? He's not just dying and then reverting to his like smaller self. He has to build up rage to transform. The thing is, are we making a tank or like a Vanguard that isn't always tanky? Because like if you are playing a tank, you want to be a tank all the time. But small Gnar is anything but a tank. So I think it makes more sense for him to be a duelist. A duelist that has a rage meter. When it's filled, he can transform, or he transforms automatically, into this bigger form where he is more tanky, maybe deals a bit more damage, but has way less range. Basically like Mr. Fantastic. Now, we could make Greg as a strategist, but what would that entail? He's like giving drinks to his teammates? I don't know if that's a good idea. That could work, but I think Greg likes to be in the middle of the action, likes to be fighting everyone. I think we could keep the idea of maybe buffing allies, but still make him a tank. Still making him a Vanguard, I should say. Now, Graves. Graves is basically just the Punisher with his shotgun. Like, he even has a smoke grenade and everything. This one is easy. Now, Gwen. We do need more strategists, man. We just have 5 so far. But, like, she has some giant scissors. That doesn't make sense for a support. Could we make her a Vanguard, though? Could we? Like, she does have, like, the dress that does make her a bit, like, bulkier in terms of silhouette, right? I think so. I think placing her as a Vanguard also enables us to have like abilities in her kit that are more supportive, because I think that fits Gwen as a character really well, right? She controls the Hallowed Mist, which are the good equivalent of the Black Mist, so giving her abilities that support allies makes sense. Like even her W in League could like be translated into a game like this to like also apply its effects to allies. I think that would be interesting. Ekarim, Vanguard, right? Engage, Vanguard, just goes in, be annoying as possible to the supports, kind of like Captain America. And if you kill them, nice. If you don't, just run away to your supports. I think that fits Ekarim decently well. Heimerdinger, basically your Namer, your Torbjorn, place turrets, deal damage without doing anything, that's it. Hui, again, we need more strategists, and you could easily make Hui a more supportive character. I mean, he is already kind of supportive in League, but I don't think he's played support all that much, but you could like recontextualize his abilities a little bit, turn them more into buffs. He already has a movement speed buff, so just make more abilities like that. And it doesn't necessarily need to have like a bunch of healing abilities. Again, it could be like Invisible Woman. She only has one healing ability, but the rest of her kit is all about controlling space and shielding or peeling for allies in other ways. I think you could make that with Wei really easily. Illaoi. Now, Illaoi is also kind of a healer in the Rune King game, but let's be honest, Vanguard makes the most sense. She wants to be in the front line for as long as possible. I think her tentacles could be interesting in a game like this, but I think they would not be as much for damage as they are in League, more so to heal her or to like sustain her. You could do something like in 2XKO where the tentacles stay on the ground, but you could activate them to like knock enemies or something like that. I think that could be cool. I think that could be a cool way to recontextualize Illaoi from a straight up bruiser to a full on like tank. Irelia, I just don't see her being anything else but a duelist. And finally we get some strategists with Ivern. His whole kit is about supporting allies. This one is easy. The question here is, how would you recontextualize his brush? Because like there's no stealth in this kind of games. So maybe he just like creates a grass field that buffs allies, maybe heals allies, something like Loki's rune from Marvel Rivals. That could work, right? And Daisy is just basically Bob from Overwatch, but instead of being about dealing damage, it would be about just CCing enemies. I think that could work. Janna, strategist, you know, she doesn't heal in League, but that's not really that hard to translate her. She's a spirit god of wind. There are many ways you could like create a healing ability for her. Besides that, wind power, so obviously movement speed buff, maybe even damage buff as well, controlling space with her tornadoes, and her ultimate could literally be 1-to-1 to what it is in League, maybe even Wild Rift. I think in Wild Rift it like moves with her now, right? So it's basically a Luna Snow ultimate. And there's also Storm, which in Marvel Rivals works similar to Lucio. In Overwatch, Lucio can switch between an area that heals his allies or an area that gives them movement speed. In Marvel Rivals, Storm can switch between movement speed and damage. Janna could honestly be any of those. Like movement speed for sure, that's literally her passive in League, but if I remember correctly, her E, her shield, gives damage, right? So you could easily translate that into an area that Janna can switch between movement speed or damage very easily. That's cool, I like that idea. Now Jarvan. Jarvan is a Vanguard. I know that he could be a duelist, but I think like expanding his ultimate so that it would be more like a basic ability of him would make him a cool Vanguard, right? Like his whole kit could be about just jumping on the supports and locking them up with his walls. But obviously you could take his ultimate in League and just make it almost 1-to-1 in this game, maybe with a bigger area and maybe with like taller walls, more like the size of Groot's walls, so that it would be really difficult for the people inside to escape. Again, in terms of playstyle, I see him kind of like Garen, more of a like Captain America type character. So how could we differentiate between the two? I mean, for starters, Jarvan has more mobility, right? Garen could be just about running in, like having like literally a shift ability that allows him to run, while Jarvan is much more about placing the flag and doing the combo. But I think we could make it so that Jarvan is a bit more about peeling allies. He's a king after all. In League, his flag does give an attack speed bonus, so maybe that could also be present in this game, as well as maybe a movement speed bonus. I think we could make his WB like Hulk's, where he shields himself but also nearby allies for a short duration. And we can translate his passive into this game as well and make him like shred enemies, maybe shred shields, something like that. Again, I was just trying to differentiate him from Garen. They are not like the most interesting characters, but I think like making Garen just be about being annoying and Jarvan about like peeling allies would be cool. Now Jax, another bruiser that could fit into either Vanguard and Duelist. Do we go to a route more like Iron Fist, where he can like time his parries and then unleash a lot of damage, or do we go into more of a Vanguard where he can like just parry everything around him and negate a lot of damage? Like in my mind, making Jax like a squishy DPS doesn't make sense. He has to be more like Mr. Fantastic or Magic, right? He has to have a bit more survivability. If he's a duelist, that's how I imagine him, and I'm going to put him there for now. Like I do think he could work as a Vanguard, but like he has his ultimate from League, he has his E, that's kind of about it. All of his abilities are very damage focused. So I think duelist just makes sense. Now Jace, basically like a Punisher situation where he can swap between weapons. In his case, he can like swap between forms of his hammer. Not much to say here. Same thing goes for Jhin, same thing goes for Jinx. ADCs are just damage dealers. I don't see them doing anything else. Something interesting that Marvel Rivals did, for example with Rocket, was giving him a kneeling gun, a gun that can heal but can also like shoot people. I'm looking at Action. I really want to put Action in strategist. I think I'm gonna put him for now because we need more. We are just in the first row yet. We need more here. Kaisante. Kaisante is a Vanguard. Kai'Sa, again, ADC, duelist. Same thing goes with Kalista. You look at her silhouette, I don't see her not being a duelist. I think it would be cool if we explored like her spears being used as melee. That's something I also said in my 2xKO video. Like in the Rune King novel, she uses the spear mostly as a melee weapon, obviously, because she's in the book, she's immortal. She doesn't have like spectral spears that she can throw and recall, whatever. So maybe we can make her a bit like Black Panther. Like she can throw the spear, but she can also like go in and do melee damage. That could be interesting. Turn her more into an assassin as opposed to a marksman. Karma, finally, another strategist. We could easily recontextualize or create a new ability for her to heal. Besides that, she shields allies, she gives them movement speed bonus, she even does a little bit of damage, also a little bit of damage, so this is perfect. Now, Karthus. What if we make Karthus a strategist as well, huh? I mean, he is a priest, so thematically it's already kinda there. Yes, I know he's a death priest, but we could make it so like he can like drain the life of enemies and then give it to allies, maybe? Like he has a huge wall that slows, controls space. We could also make it so that wall destroys projectiles or reduces the damage that those projectiles do, something interesting like that. His ultimate, besides just dealing damage, could also apply some kind of debuff to enemies that like reduces the healing that they receive or something like that. We could make something interesting with Karthus as a support. I believe it. Now, Kassadin. If we translate him one-to-one from League to this game, he would probably be an assassin. Like, again, another magic type character. He even has the portals and everything, like the teleports. I'm just thinking if he could be a Vanguard. Because if you look at his design, he is wearing a bit of armor, right? He's a bit more bulkier than some of like the assassins that we have here. But I just don't really see it. I mean, I'm thinking, does it make sense for a tank to be teleporting around? That just seems like really annoying to deal with, right? I can't really think of like a tank that does that in any game, but wouldn't that make it more interesting though, right? It's unique, it's a tank with a lot of mobility, but to compensate, he doesn't have like that much tankiness, he doesn't have that much crowd control, but in that case, what is he doing? What am I saying? Let's just put him in duelist. And Katarina, assassin, goes in duelist. Kayle. Kayle has the potential to be a strategist, right? She has a healing, she has movement speed bonuses, she has the ultimates that make someone invulnerable. The thing is, I think like the damage waves that she has now are very iconic. So hear me out. What if she's a strategist, but she's not like a cloak and dagger or rocket type strategist? She's more like Mantis or Invisible Woman, where she also can deal a bunch of damage. She could even have like her passive in League, where instead of leveling up, because that's not a thing here, she could like transform after a number of assists, becoming her like ascended form, and suddenly she's dealing way more damage than before. But to get to that form, you have to peel for Alice before you are able to ascend and become what would essentially be more of a duelist type character. Would that be an interesting gimmick, or is that like too niche? I think it fits the character. I know that making her a duelist and Morgana a strategist would be a better parallel between the two, but maybe we can make it so like where Morgana starts as a strategist that deals damage and then gets more supportive throughout the fight, or maybe we can just ignore those parallels because that also doesn't exist in League, like Morgana doesn't ascend. I don't know, let me know down below. Now Kayn is definitely a duelist, like shadow form duelist 100%, red form more of a Vanguard, right? So what if Kayn starts as a normal duelist, he has his shadow step to get to the back line, he can dish out a decent amount of damage, but then at some point he gets to make a decision whether he wants to go full in on duelist or become more of a Vanguard. Now, how would this decision work in this type of game? We could go the Kayle route, where he needs to get kills or assists, and then he can just choose the form. I know choosing might feel weird for League players, but in Legends of Runeterra you can also choose the form that you want. In gameplay, it's more about adapting adapting to the circumstances than it is like in the lore. In the lore, it's a battle between Kayn and the Darkin and who will prevail. But in terms of gameplay, it's more like, do I need a tank or do I need more damage? That's basically it. I think Duelist makes sense. Now, Cannon. Can we make a small tank? Can we turn Cannon into a tank? That would be really funny. I don't think we can. I don't think he has like the body type, the silhouette for that. Can we turn him into a support then? Maybe he could like give electric buffs to his team? Like, but how would he heal allies? I mean, he's a ninja, right? He could like make some kind of jutsu magic, Yordle ninja magic to heal allies. Like, this might be an insane one, like putting Cannon in strategist when in League he deals damage and he is a frontline character because of his ultimate. But I think if we give him a healing ability, maybe kind of like Kiriko, we can make him more of a strategist. Like, he has the stuns, he could like buff people with electricity, whatever. Then he has like a big stun in his ultimate and he has a dash to just survive getting dived in. I can see this working. Maybe I'm crazy. Now, Kindred. Kindred are the spirit gods of death, so Duelist makes the most sense. However, her ultimate does blend the line a little bit, and like giving her some kind of healing ability wouldn't be that far-fetched. But like Lamb as a bow, Wolf is a giant wolf, like if anything a Vanguard could also work. I don't know, maybe I'm just trying to not have as many Duelists, but that can be helped. Kled. Now Kled I think works with Bruce Banner mini diva gimmick. And honestly, in League, it's not that far from Bruce Banner. In League, he has his basic attacks, he has the passive from his W, which makes him attack faster, and he has a dash with his Q, I believe, the gun, which is basically like Bruce Banner already. And yeah, besides that, he, like, sure, you could make him a duelist, but again, that specific gimmick, which is, in my opinion, what makes Kled like special and stand out in the League roster, would just be more fitting of a Vanguard than a Duelist, in my opinion. Kog'Maw, ADC goes to Duelist. I don't really see what else you could do with Kog'Maw. Can you turn him into a strategist? Maybe like a void creature healing people doesn't make that much sense, but you could bend the rules a little bit for this kind of game, right? But I think like he is the living artillery, like it makes sense for him to be a Duelist. Like his ultimate could even be like Bastion's old ultimate, or maybe the current ultimate, I don't remember, but basically like you get into like a turret state and you just start choosing places on the map that you want your stuff to fall. That's an ability that just makes sense for a Duelist. LeBlanc. Now, we could turn her into Loki, right? And LeBlanc, from the new comic at least, we see that she has that red magic that's able to summon Atakan, but also bind Atakan to a human host, and Mordekaiser is all about the power over life and death, so it wouldn't be that far-fetched to think that maybe LeBlanc could use her powers to heal somebody, right? Now, does that make sense for the character? I'm not sure, but if you think about it, it also doesn't make that much sense for Loki. And Loki works decently well in Marvel Rivals. I think I'm putting her as a strategist. She could be just an annoying character. She could be like an annoying support to lock in because she could create clones, swap places with them, and Loki's ultimate would probably fit her really well, like just transforming into another champion. I know that's what like Nico and Silas and Viego do, but like lore-wise, that fits LeBlanc really well as well. But if I had to guess, that would probably be saved for Silas. However, Silas doesn't really transform into the champion, so maybe LeBlanc can transform into them. Maybe she can't use the ultimate, wherever, but Silas still specifically the ultimate. Like, we could come up with something to differentiate between the two. Lee Sin. So Lee Sin, probably an Iron Fist type character. I think it also fits his personality decently well, fits his gameplay in League of just going in, dealing as much damage as possible to one specific target, maybe knock them into his own team. That's also that some duelists are also able to do in Marvel Rivals. For example, Winter Soldier, for example, Wolverine. I think that makes sense for Lee Sin. Leona. Leona is a lady full of armor and is a tank and a support in League. Vanguard makes sense. You could turn her into like more of a Brigitte, I don't know how to pronounce her name, in Overwatch though, right? CC, but also healing, also bonus to allies. I think so. Again, it's called strategist, not healer, for a reason. I think you could make Leona a strategist. And I'm only putting her here because we need more strategists, because we need to balance the roster a little bit, because look at this. We have 4 rows of duelists, but let it be known that yes, I could see Leona as a Vanguard, of course I would, she's a tank in League. Now, Lilia makes more sense as a strategist, right? I think you could easily turn her into a very fun, more supportive character, like give her a kneeling ability, make it so that her sleep can be used more consistently instead of being an ultimate ability, and boom, she's a support. Now, Lissandra. I think you could adapt Lissandra into any of these roles. Vanguard, her silhouette is already kind of bulkier, especially on the bottom, especially because of the helmet, so she could work. She could like CC enemies, that would make sense. Duelist, you could turn her into a Hela type character, like just throwing shards of ice, sniping people. Strategist, you could also make it so like she's more of a Luna Snow type character, giving buffs to allies, giving ice themed buffs and freezing enemies. So I don't really know where to put her. I look at her ultimate and I guess Vanguard could make sense, but it could also just be like Mei in Overwatch, right? And be an ability that she can use more often instead of being an ultimate. I'm going to leave her as a duelist, but I think this is one of the few characters where I could see her in any of these three roles. Lucian, ADC, not much to say here. Lulu, strategist, also not much to say here. Now Lux. Lux could be a duelist, Lux could be a strategist. Because we need more strategists, I'm going to put her here. And she's basically Dagger, right? Light powers that heal people. You could adapt her E from League into being like an area that heals people, besides just slowing and damaging enemies. She already has the shield that can hit multiple people, that could like be translated one-to-one from League to this game. Her ultimate doesn't make as much sense for a strategist. However, we could make it more like Moira's ultimate from Overwatch. Maybe not like full on a beam that lasts, but a beam that also heals people. Kinda like Senna's ultimate, but Senna I think only shields, doesn't heal. Malphite is a Vanguard, I don't think there's much doubt about that. Malzahar, again, I don't really see any of the Void champions being healers, so I'm going to be placing him as a duelist. I don't think he has the silhouette to really be a Vanguard, so to the duelist pile he goes. Maokai. Maokai is a Vanguard. You could make him a strategist, but I think making him a peeling Vanguard works decently well. Master Yi is a duelist. I don't have any doubts about that. Mel. Now, in League, she is presented as much more of a carry. However, they did say that she could flex into support as well. But I think I'm putting her as a duelist. This list just keeps growing. There's just way too many duelists. Again, that's why I'm trying to put some characters here like Kennen, like Kayle, that LeBlanc, that would not really fit into that supportive role that much. I'm trying to like be a bit more creative here, and I could do that with Mel, but I'm just not that familiar with her gameplay in League yet. And in terms of personality in lore, yes, in Arcane, especially in the first season, she's not really a fighter, but that's kind of where her character is going toward now, right? Someone who is much less passive and much more active. So I think duelist right now makes more sense for her, but I can see her as a strategist. I can, but I think duelist makes more sense. Milio. Milio is a strategist. I think that one is obvious. He has fire powers, but he has fire healing powers. I think his ability to remove crowd control could become a basic ability in a game like this, because in general there isn't that much crowd control in this type of games. I think it would be cool if you could use the Fuemigos more like Loki's clones, but maybe moving them as well, where you could like place them in an area, maybe move them to another area, maybe command them to follow an ally. That would be cool. Misfortune. Well, Misfortune is all about guns. I don't see her being anything else but a duelist. Hey, if you watched the video this far, chances are you are not subscribed, because about 90% of people who watch my videos aren't actually subscribed. So if you are enjoying the video, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. And Mordekaiser is literally a walking tower. He has to be a Vanguard. Now, would his ultimate work in a game like this? I think so. It would definitely suck to lose your Vanguard in the middle of a fight, but that also happens in League, right? You also lose your frontline in the middle of a fight when Mordekaiser ults. I think it can work. His E would also be really good in this type of games. And in general, I do see him as a much more aggressive frontline, not a lot of peeling besides self-peeling. Morgana. Now, we could make Morgana a strategist. That is what she is in League. I could see her as a Vanguard for the same reason that I said for Gwen. Her dress does make her silhouette a bit more bulkier than other characters, but we need strategists, so to the strategy role she goes. Naafiri. Now, what if we make Naafiri's size a bit more canon, a bit more accurate to the lore, and we actually turn her into a big dog. Like, she is a Darkin, has like blood magic, healing powers. We could turn this into a Vanguard that can like just be annoying, I guess. I can't really think of a character in this type of games that has a gimmick similar to Nefiri, where she just is a bunch of dogs. Right, that's something hard to translate into games like this. I don't know, I think Nefiri is a hard one. It's a hard one to adapt. I'm leaving her as a Vanguard with the idea that she would be like a big dog like she is in the lore. And again, mostly just so we don't have more duelists than we already do. The list is already big. I want more Vanguards and more strategists. Otherwise, I would just put Nefiri in the duelist category because she's an assassin in League. Nami is a strategist for sure. I think all of her abilities would translate super well into a game like this. She has the bubble projectile for crowd control, she can buff allies, she can heal allies, she can heal and damage at the same time, which is fun, and her ultimate could literally be 1-to-1 in a game like this, and it would be really powerful. Nasus is a Vanguard. I don't think you can implement the passive of his Q. Legends of Runeterra did a fine job adapting it. For a game like this, you probably can't, unless you're like counting the kills that he has or the takedowns, but I don't think that's as interesting, as fun. So you'd probably want to explore other parts of the character. For example, his like plague magic thing, like he could summon like scarabs that debuff enemies. His E could be an ability that he places on the ground and like debuffs enemies as well, maybe gives them reduced healing, something like that. I think there's a lot of cool directions that you could take Nasus as a Vanguard. Nautilus, another Vanguard. I think most of his abilities would translate super well into a game like this. He has a hook that lets him not only crowd control enemies but also get into the backline sooner. His passive could be an ability where he just stuns an enemy. His ultimate could work 1-to-1. You could like target an enemy and then send the waves after them. That would be interesting. But yeah, straight up just a Vanguard. Nothing much to say here. Niku. Could we make Niku a strategist? I don't know. I'm thinking about what makes Niku special, which is her ability to turn into enemies and mess with the enemy team. And that seems more like a duelist role, right? Like a spy from Team Fortress. So for that reason, I am putting her as a duelist. But I do see the potential of her as a strategist, right? I do see that. Nidalee. I think Nidalee is interesting. She would be like Nar and like Mr. Fantastic. However, instead of making her cougar form way more tankier, like we did for Elise, for example, I think it could be more like a melee assassin. Nidalee in her human form could be a bit more like Namor, just throwing spears, controlling space. Instead of with the turrets, it would be like traps. And then maybe if you hit someone with your spear or with like an ability like Black Panther's spear, you could go in as the cougar form and you'd be a bit more tanky, like magic, but you'd have much less range. But that could be compensated by having a bit more mobility as well. So I think she's a duelist. I don't see her as anything else. And then this list is already getting really big. There's a lot of champions in this game. Nila. I think Nila is a duelist. She could be a Vanguard, but again, I don't think her silhouette works for that, so I am leaving her as a duelist. Nocturne. Nocturne also probably a duelist, right? I'm thinking if we could make him a Vanguard. Does he really want to be in the middle of a fight? Probably not. Could we take something from the lore to make him more of a Vanguard? Also probably not. I think he would be a duelist with like some crowd control abilities, a bit more like a Cloak from Marvel Rivals, where he could like blind enemies or something like that. I think that could work for Nocturne. Nunu and Willump, definitely a Vanguard, right? Go in with the snowball, be as annoying as possible, as hard to kill as you can. That makes sense for Nunu and Willump. Olaf. There's literally Thor in Marvel Rivals. I think Olaf would not be that far in terms of playstyle. Just go in, deal a massive amount of damage, being super hard to kill, but not as hard to kill as some of the other Vanguards. Orianna. I think Orianna could be a strategist. She has a shield, she has a movement speed bonus. We could give her some kind of tech device that also heals. That also doesn't seem that far-fetched to me. Her gimmick of placing the ball on someone is pretty cool, and I believe there's already like an ability similar to that in one of these games, but I can't really remember right now. But yeah, I think her ball ability would work super well here, just placing it onto an ally, and the bonus that it gives, like the movement speed or whatever, would be applied around that ally and to everyone near them. Orianna, pretty good strategist to me. Ornn is a Vanguard. I don't really see him in any other role. Pantheon. Now, what if we also put Pentin in Vanguard? Again, a character that wants to be in the fight for as long as possible. He has fallen out of the role of a solo laner in League for quite some time. He's been played mostly as a support. So why don't we take that further and make him someone that wants to be on top of the enemy supports, just being annoying, just using his shield to survive, just maybe even crowd controlling them. I think that could work. Obviously he could work as a duelist. He's literally a warrior with a spear. Obviously he could work as a duelist, but again, I want to make this a bit more diverse. I think he could work as a Vanguard. And Poppy, also a Vanguard, very similar playstyle, I would say. Go in, crowd control, survive, take as much damage as you can, peel for your allies. That's how I would translate Poppy into a game like this. Pyke. Pyke is a support in League, but let's be honest, he's an assassin. I can't really imagine a Pyke healing allies. And if we look at Marvel Rivals, there's literally a Winter Soldier, which is basically Pyke in that game. He has a hook, he has a dash, he has an ultimate that executes. Not only that, but if the ultimate executes, he can cast it again and again and again. That's literally just Pyke. Kiana, in terms of lore, personality, doesn't make sense to be anything else but a duelist, unfortunately, because we already have so many. I wonder how we could translate her powers or her gimmicks into a game like this, because you'd assume that there would be many different maps, so we would probably have to modify her gimmick a lot, and maybe the elements aren't tied to a single ability. Maybe she has like one ability per element or something like that. Queen, duelist, not much to say here. I think Queen would be actually more interesting in a game like this as opposed to in League, because a game like this could utilize Valor in more interesting ways than just shooting the bird at an enemy to blind them. She could like place him in an area and he would deal damage, or he would like follow a specific enemy dealing damage to them. Maybe he could even attach to her, allowing her to fly like Iron Man or Storm. That would be interesting. Rakan. Now, Rakan could be a Vanguard. He is an engaged support, right? But we do need more healers, and it's not like he doesn't heal in League. He also shields. So I think we could make him a strategist. I also don't think his silhouette fits the Vanguard all that much, and I do think that most people that like Rakan like him as a support character, so strategist makes sense. Rammus. Rammus is a Vanguard and would probably be a fun one. I imagine him as something like Wrecking Ball from Overwatch, but instead of being range, he's straight up just melee. He just wants to be right in everyone's faces. I think he could take his W stance from League and make it so that in this game he takes no damage during it. However, if there's a melee character attacking him, that melee character would take damage back, turning Rammus into an anti-melee character. Rek'Sai. I think we can make Rek'Sai a Vanguard, just make her super big like we did with Naafiri, make her like super annoying, like being able to go underground and then burst out, knocking people up, being able to just maybe swing her tail and like swipe enemies away, like crowd controlling them, controlling space. I think that makes sense for Rek'Sai. Rel. Now, I wish I could put Rel in strategist, but I don't see how we could give her a kneeling ability, so I'm putting her as a Vanguard. I do think it makes more sense too, she's a tank in League. How would we do her gimmick though? What if instead of a Vanguard we actually put her as a duelist? Like, she has a big lance. I know that she has an armor form, but it could be like Mr. Fantastic, right? I don't know, I just think Rel's character and her design fit duelist more, but I am going to put her as a Vanguard. Now that I think about it, I think she could like give armor to her allies and stuff like that, which would place her as a bit more of a peeling tank. She can keep like the passive ability from her Q. I don't even know if that's still a thing. I have not played her since she was reworked. Her Q could be like a piercing ability that reduces shields or deals more damage to shields, something like that. And her ultimate could be something like Magneto. Instead of just pulling people toward her, maybe she could like pull projectiles or something like that. Now that I think of it, you could also just make her something similar to Sigma, where Sigma can absorb projectiles. You could give an ability like that to Rel as well, exploring more the magnetic/metal powers that she has, which I don't think are super interesting in League. Renata. Now, I think Renata makes sense as a strategist. It's not hard to give her a healing ability. It's part of her character, part of her lore, that she has this Chemtech formula that can, yes, turn people berserk, but also heal them. Like, that's her W in League. That could also be an interesting ability to have in a game like this. Use that ability on a duelist or on a Vanguard. If they die, they don't actually die, they stay alive for a couple more seconds, unless they kill someone. In that case, they are just fully revived, which is cool. I think that ability could work one-to-one in a game like this. Renekton. Well, we put Nasus in Vanguard. I think Renekton makes sense to be there as well. He wants to be in a fight for as long as possible. just life stealing and staying alive. His weapon also has like a bunch of range, which is perfect when you want to hit like multiple people, which is how I imagine he would play as a Vanguard in a game like this. And I didn't mention this for Nasus, but for both Nasus and Renekton's ultimate, it would be like turning even bigger and being able to soak even more damage. So Vanguard makes perfect sense. Rengar. Rengar is an assassin, I have no doubts about that. Now this list also has Rast. I'm putting Rast as more of a Vanguard character. Again, I already talked about Kayn and how his gimmick could be turning into an even more dangerous duelist or turning into a Vanguard, but I actually didn't think about how that could work in a game where you can switch characters. Maybe Kayn is a character that requires some commitment, like you have to pick him early, otherwise you can't get to the transformation in time, not sure. Riven, I think Riven is a duelist. If there's a character close to magic in League is probably Riven, and I'm not just saying that because they are both ladies with giant swords, I'm saying that because they are both about dashing and getting into the backline, and both of their ultimates are basically just like, hey, now I deal more damage. And I believe magic also has like a projectile that she summons with her sword. That's Riven's ultimate. We can turn that part of her ultimate into a basic ability. I think that would work perfect in a game like this. Rumble, well, he is in a giant mech, and that to me screams Vanguard. I think he could just apply burn to a bunch of enemies, but that burn doesn't deal that much damage. He has a shield that he can give to himself. He has projectiles that slow enemies. The hit mechanic could also be interesting to manage in a game like this. And well, he has an ultimate that is all about controlling area and space. Perfect for the Vanguard in my opinion. Now Ryze. I could place him in strategist, but I think duelist makes more sense, especially like with his ability to spread the flux mark and then hit a bunch of enemies with his Q. That screams DPS to me. And speaking of DPS, is there a more DPS than Samira? Like, she literally has a sword and guns. In a game like this, you could expand her moveset even more. Maybe a couple more nods to Devil May Cry. That would be cool. Sejuani, I don't see her as anything but a Vanguard. I think being able to swing her weapon around and hit multiple enemies and also freezing, taking damage, that works perfect for a Vanguard in a game like this. Senna, I think we can easily slot Senna as a strategist. I know that in League she blurs the line between support and ADC, but we can do the same thing here. She could be a strategist that is also a bit of a duelist as well, but like she has healing powers, we have to put her here. And same thing goes for Seraphine. She's literally Luna Snow basically, or I guess I should say Luna Snow is basically Seraphine. But yeah, music powers, buffing allies, healing allies. You could even give her the Lucio passive where you can switch between two modes, but maybe that's a bit too close because Lucio is a music themed character as well. Sett. Now Sett could also be a character like Iron Fist, just being on the face of the supports, being really annoying and dealing a lot of damage, but we could turn him into a Vanguard, right? One that just as he soaks damage he gets stronger and stronger. That fits the Vanguard role pretty well. Shaco. I don't see Shaco as anything but a duelist. I know that he can also be played support in League, but a murder clown is not going to be a healer. I just don't see it. Shen. Now Shen is a Vanguard, 100%. A peeling Vanguard, all about negating damage and protecting and shielding allies. I think that fits Shen perfectly. And Shyvana I also would put as a Vanguard. Her dragon form is 100% a Vanguard, no doubt in my mind about that, but you could make her mortal human form also a bit more bulkier, right? So that her silhouette wouldn't stand out amongst the other Vanguards. You could also even make her just taller in general. That would fit her character really well. And creating an area of fire around her is a cool ability for a tank, but I think her other abilities would probably have to be adapted, or at least we'd have to create new abilities for her to really feel like a tank or like a Vanguard. Maybe an ability where she jumps on top of an enemy even in human form, and then make her melee attacks have a bit more area, a bit more range as well. Shyvana desperately needs a redesign, so there's a lot of paths that you could take for her to work in a game like this. Singed. Now, what if we make Singed a strategist? Could that work? Like, he is is an alchemist, so healing not really that far-fetched of an idea. And now that the arcane version is the canon version of Singed, we could make him less bulkier, less tankier, maybe ditch the shield or maybe use the shield in a more supportive way. Like, I can definitely see him as a Vanguard, but I think he could work as a strategist. For example, instead of using his ultimate, the Insanity Potion, on himself, maybe he could give it to an ally, similar to Ana's ultimate in Overwatch, like just a big buff that you give most of the time to your Vanguard. Cyan is a Vanguard, he's just there to be a bullet sponge, take as much damage as possible, but also deal a surprising amount of damage. I see him kinda like a Reinhardt in Overwatch, right? We can turn Cyan's ultimate into a normal ability instead of an ultimate, and maybe his passive could be his ultimate, right? He enters a rage stage where if he dies, he gets revived for a couple seconds. Sivir is a duelist, I don't see any other role for her. Skarner is definitely a Vanguard, very tanky character, very huge character, likes to be in the middle of a fight, has his E, that maybe we can make it so that he goes underground, though that is a bit similar to Rek'Sai, so maybe he could also go through walls, for example, just to differentiate between the two. And his ultimate is just very good in a game like this. I'm thinking of Groot's ultimate, but you can also drag the enemies toward your team. That's overpowered in my opinion. Smolder. Can we turn Smolder into a duelist? I don't think so. I mean, his ultimate does heal people, but I don't think he makes that much sense as a strategist. Sona is definitely a strategist. Same goes for Soraka. Characters that are known to be healers in League make sense to be healers here as well. Now Swain. Well, we do have Darius as a Vanguard, LeBlanc as a strategist, so maybe Swain as a duelist makes the most sense. We could place Swain as a Vanguard, right? He could be in the middle of a fight, draining, restoring his health as he deals damage. That could work, but for the sake of having these three in different roles, I think I'm putting him as a duelist. However, he wouldn't be a glass cannon, he would definitely be more on the tankier side of duelists, and to compensate for that, he wouldn't deal as much damage. Sylas. Now, Sylas could be a duelist as well, but I can also see him as a Vanguard, using his chains to just crowd control people, stay there in the fight as long as possible. His healing, I guess it could work. I don't really know what's the explanation behind his healing in League, but you could interpret it as Sylas like absorbing the magic from someone and healing himself. And he's also like on the bulkier side, he has a lot of muscle. In terms of silhouette, he could work as a Vanguard. As for his ultimate, I already said that LeBlanc would be cool to transform into enemies, but I also said that about Nico. I think we could just make Sylas like steal the ultimate and then use the enemy ult instead of like transforming into them like Loki. Like Echo, I believe, does that too in Overwatch. Not sure how to really differentiate between these three champions. Syndra, I think it's interesting. She obviously fits as a duelist, no doubt about that, but we could also turn her into more of a zone controlling Vanguard. I'm thinking of stuff like Penny from Marvel Rivals. Maybe you could place like Syndra's orbs on the ground and they would like deal damage over time to people around them, and you could place like multiple of them, you could like reposition them, or you can just do that, but she's also like a duelist and she's like flying around like Scarlet Witch, like Storm. Maybe that makes more sense for her. Tommy Boy is definitely a Vanguard, right? His silhouette just works too well for a Vanguard for him to be anything else. And we can actually bring his ability of traveling with allies back. I think it would work super well in a game like this. Imagine he uses his ability so that he and another tank can dive the enemy backline. Maybe a tank that doesn't have as much mobility could pair with Tahm Kench to do stuff like this. That would be really cool. And obviously he could also like swallow allies to protect them. I'm trying to think if there's a character that does that. I can't really think of one. Tahm Kench swallowing people, pretty good ability. I wouldn't put it as an ultimate, so I don't really know what his ultimate could be. Talia. Can Talia be a strategist? Well, she can summon a wall. She can easily just give people like armor with her rock magic. Can she heal allies? That's the question. I mean, we don't have to take it super literally. You could give her an ability that heals but doesn't make that much sense lore-wise. Either way, I don't think she would be a strategist that focuses primarily on healing. She would be about controlling zones and crowd controlling enemies. Again, obviously, yes, she could be a duelist. I'm just trying to balance the roster a bit more, because otherwise we would have like 60 to 70% duelists and then barely any of the other roles. Talon is an assassin. I don't see him doing anything else besides that. Taric is peeling Vanguard. Again, a peeling tank in League makes sense to be a Vanguard in a game like this. That's why Taric is here, Braum is here, Shen is here. Teemu. Can we make Teemu a strategist? Let me think. I don't think so. Like, we could come up with like a way that he can heal people. Like, we could make it so like, maybe yes, he has poison darts, but he also has healing darts. Making Teemu basically like Ana from Overwatch. Would that work? What else would Teemu do, actually? Like, Teemu just shoots darts and shoots more darts and places mushrooms. So that's also not that much of a duelist. So maybe we can come up with like more abilities, maybe related to the Yordles, maybe related to Yordle Magic, Bundle City, that could be like supportive in a way. Like, maybe he's able to open a portal under his allies and like summon them to him. Something like that. I think you could make Teemu a support, and like, I think making Teemu like Invisible Woman, where he can just turn invisible and it's so annoying, so hard to catch him, would work super well. And we also have other duelists that can turn invisible. We have Evelynn, we have Shaco, Nocturne could also maybe turn invisible, Pyke as well, so you don't really lose that gimmick of having like an annoying duelist that is turning invisible and killing your backline. You could make Teemu like just an annoying support that turns invisible. Now, Thresh. We could make Thresh a strategist, like just someone who's in the backline and is able to like send out the lantern so the tank can come back earlier if they are like dying or something. But you could also just make him like he is in League, where he's a frontliner that can also bring an ally with him using the lantern, like basically the same logic that I said for Tahm Kench. Though I do like the irony that someone like Thresh would be a healer. I do find that really funny. I don't know if I should put him in strategist though. I think I'm going to put him for now, but I might come back to him later. Tristana. AD carry goes to duelist, that's about it. Trundle. I think Trundle could work better as a Vanguard than a duelist. I think he has the body, the silhouette for a Vanguard. I think him creating an icy area where he and maybe allies deal more damage or attack faster or something like that is interesting. I think him being able to place the pillar is basically like Groot placing the walls. It's just a way to both catch enemies but also peel for allies. And obviously like the healing capabilities of his passive and his ultimate could be translated in a way for him to sustain himself in the middle of the enemy team. Tryndamere. Now, do we put him in duelist or do we put him in Vanguard? I think we could make Tryndamere someone like Wolverine, where he's a duelist, but there's this passive, this gimmick that makes him really hard to kill. Again, these roles aren't just damage or tank, they are characters that blur the line between the two. I think Tryndamere would really blur the line between duelist and Vanguard, the same way that Wolverine does in Marvel Rivals. Twisted Fate. Now, I can see Twisted Fate being a strategist. Like, he's basically Gambit for Marvel, and if Gambit was in Marvel Rivals, he would most definitely be a duelist, but we could give Twisted Fate like more types of cards that he can use. Maybe some cards heal, maybe some cards give bonus to allies, like maybe he could be like Zenyatta, where you can place a card on an ally Vanguard and that Vanguard is receiving healing over time. I think Twisted Fate could work as a strategist. Again, he's a duelist. If we're making a 1-to-1 conversion from League, he would be a duelist. That would make sense, but to spice things up and to be a bit more creative, I am placing him as a strategist. Twitch. Now, another AD carry. I don't really have much to say. Most AD carries literally have a ranged weapon and all they do is shoot, so there's not much room there for them to be a Vanguard or for them to be a strategist. That isn't to say that they are all the same. No, they are very diverse even within the fact that they all have a ranged weapon, but even within that diversity, I don't see them being anything but a duelist. Udyr. I think Udyr would be a Vanguard, but he would be a Vanguard that would blur the line between Vanguard and duelist. I think in the similar way to Olaf or to Thor for Marvel Rivals, like he has abilities to keep him in the fight longer, but he also has abilities that deal a lot of damage if you're not paying attention. Urgot. Now, we could put him in duelist, but like his silhouette is just so big that you could easily turn him into a Vanguard. I imagine him more like a Wrecking Ball or Mauga, I think that's the name from Overwatch, where it's just, yes, it's a tank, but they have a minigame, and if you don't respect it, you are going to melt. Varus. Again, ADC, duelist. Could we give him healing abilities? Maybe. He's a Darking, there's like blood magic and stuff like that, but I don't think that would make that much sense for him. Same thing goes for Vayne. What else are you going to do with her besides being a duelist? Even if you go the Sentinel route and give her the like light crossbow, I still don't think it makes sense for her to heal. Like in Senna's case, Senna is special. She has the powers of the Hallowed Mist. Akshan has a special weapon that is able to revive people, so having healing abilities makes sense for these two. For Vayne, not so much. Veigar. I would love to turn Veigar into a tank with his mech. Does that make sense for this game? I think maybe the mech could be his ultimate? I'm thinking if making his mech like the default would make sense. And I don't think so. I think being small is kind of part of Veigar's like character. Like he is the tiny master of evil. So it being an ultimate makes sense because it's a contrast to that. But being in that mech all the time, I don't think it makes sense. So I think I'm making him a duelist. Now, Vel'Koz. I don't know. Obviously, duelist would work, but we could make him huge like he is in the lore and turn him into more of a tank character, of a Vanguard. Yeah, I don't know. I think you could really take him into either direction. Either make him like a backline duelist with a lot of range or just a Vanguard with a lot of crowd control. I think duelist is what makes the most sense. I think when you think of Vel'Koz, you think of annoying projectiles and huge laser beams. So duelist makes the most sense in my opinion. Now Vex. I think Vex would be interesting as a Vanguard, but I don't think she has the silhouette for it. Like yes, you could maybe think of Shadow, but like Shadow is a Shadow, is supposed to be on the ground, so her silhouette is going to be pretty small. Now, can we give her some healing powers? Maybe? I mean, she's a Yordle, we could make stuff up or just do like Talia and give her like an healing ability that isn't super in line with her lore or with in-universe laws, and I think we could turn her into like an anti-dive strategist, like a strategist that is there to counter divers, which is basically what she is in League with her passive that allows her to deal more damage to champions that use dashes. You could take that idea, give her abilities to control area, she has the crowd control with the fear, all she needs is an healing ability and she could work well as a strategist. Vi. Now, I miss the old Doomfist, the old damage Doomfist, but I do think Vanguard makes most sense for her. And you can take a lot of inspiration from current Doomfist, where he can use the gauntlets to block damage, and then based on the damage that he receives, he can dish out a stronger punch. Combine that with Vi's silhouette, which is already pretty bulky, and she could easily pass as a Vanguard in my opinion. Viego. Now, Viego is a duelist, I think that makes the most sense for him. I think the hardest part would be translating his passive, like do we just make the same thing that it is in League? Maybe. It's not like super lore accurate, like in lore he's able to like possess, quote unquote, more like sway people to his side with his magic, but possessing people in League is pretty iconic to his kit. Personally, I wouldn't put that in a game like this, I think. Especially when there's already characters like LeBlanc, Nico, maybe even Silas to some extent. Viego could work decently well without that ability. I think if anything, we should emphasize the Black Mist powers. In League, it just places them on a wall and he gets stealth and movement speed. We could maybe expand that to be a bit more interesting in a game like this. Like maybe it also damages enemies. Maybe it also slows them. Something a bit more interesting. Maybe he can control the mist. Maybe it can like form and become like a cloud of like raves or something like that. Something a bit more interesting. Victor. Now, Victor could be a Vanguard, like more of a Sigma type character. I think that would probably fit his character now with the Arcane Retcon more than his current gameplay in League. His current gameplay is basically just old Victor, which fit that character better than it does the new one. I think I'm going to put him as a Vanguard, though we could also make him a strategist, right? He does heal people. Maybe you can heal allies, and if they die, you can turn them into those like robots that he has. That could be interesting, right? This is probably one of the few characters that can heal in universe but doesn't heal in the game. So let's utilize that. Vladimir. What if Vladimir is just Moira? What if he can just deal damage to enemies and then use that damage as healing to allies? That makes sense, right? And like, do we want him as a Vanguard? Like his silhouette could work for that, but as a duelist, he would also work. I could see him being something like Scarlet Witch, where he can like suck the blood out of his enemies and then just disappear and be super annoying. But he can also do that and be a strategist, right? That's basically Moira, if we think about it. Now, Volibear. Yes, I could put him as a duelist. Then we would have Anivia as a strategist and Ornn as a vanguard, but does Volibear really scream duelist? He's a giant bear, and because of that, I think Vanguard makes the most sense. He wants to be in the fight for as long as possible. He has like bunch of AoE abilities. Like it would be cool if you could just summon a storm around him. Kinda like Moon Knight's ultimate, but maybe not dealing that much damage, maybe even empowering allies, right? I think that makes more sense than just making him a duelist. Warwick. Now, Warwick is in a similar spot to Volibear. Yes, he could work as a duelist, like he would basically be Wolverine, if we really think about it, but he could also work as a vanguard. The thing is, Warwick's gimmick is about chasing enemies, and chasing low health enemies, which doesn't really scream vanguard to me. Like, sure, he could be like Tryndamere, he could be like Wolverine, where he is a bit harder to kill because he wants to chase, he wants to reach his target and stay on them, but he doesn't need to be a straight up vanguard for that. Wukong, actually also in a similar spot. I think you could make a case for him to be a vanguard, but also for him to be a duelist as well. I think if we want to do justice to Wukong as a character, you have to focus on the playful nature of him being able to summon clones and become invisible and bamboozle enemies, and I think that makes more sense for a duelist than a vanguard. Xayah, another ADC that goes to the duelist pile, not much to say here. Now, Xerath. We could turn Xerath into a vanguard. Not that we need that much vanguards, we do need more strategists, unfortunately, but we could turn him into a vanguard, right? Like, the only reason he's squishy in the game is because he is supposed to be carry mid laner, a ranged mage, so being squishy there makes sense, but in a game like this, he could easily have more health, be more bulkier, have more of a hitbox. However, we already have Azir as a strategist, we already have Nasus and Renekton as vanguards. Maybe Xerath as a duelist isn't that bad of an idea. He's all about hitting people from afar anyway. You could give him the ability to just fly around and he would basically be Iron Man. Now, Jinzhou, I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Jinzhou. I think it makes sense for him to be a duelist. I'm thinking if he could be a vanguard. I don't think so. Basically the same idea as Jax, right? Sure, he can parry enemy attacks, but I think it makes more sense for him to just go all in and just focus on damage. Sure, with a parry, kinda like Iron Fist in Marvel Rivals, but that's about it. Yasuo. I think Yasuo is a duelist. I don't see him in any other role. His wind wall would definitely be a very powerful ability in a game like this. Just being able to block any projectile is pretty good, and his ultimate would be, I guess, kinda like Wolverine's ultimate. Not really. I think there's a character in Paladin that has a similar ultimate to him, but I don't really remember. But either way, I think being able to just throw a tornado, hit a bunch of people, and then lock them in place for a while, pretty powerful ultimate. Yone, another duelist, basically Yasuo 2.0 in some ways, just even more annoying. Yorick, I can see Yorick as a vanguard. He would probably be a bit similar to Nefiri, right? Having a bunch of creatures following you around. I'm not really sure how that could work in the context of a game like this, but I don't think it's impossible. I'm sure there could be like creative ways to implement that. And summoning the maiden, again, like Ivern, it's basically like Bob from Overwatch, except the maiden would probably be more of a tank as well. What would the maiden even do? I guess she could like drain the health of everyone around her, maybe even healing Yorick in the process, not sure. Yuumi is a strategist. Finally another one. It's been a while, but yeah, I don't see her in any other role but strategist. I think utilizing her portals could be interesting. That's something that she doesn't do in League, but it's a core part of book and their lore, so I think we could expand that and make her kit a bit more interesting than it is in League. Now, Zac is basically Mr. Fantastic, or I should say Mr. Fantastic is basically Zac, so I could see him as a duelist, but I think Vanguard makes the most sense, because on top of being like Mr. Fantastic, Zac would also have some kind of sustain ability, like he has his passive in League, right? It could be like in League, where using abilities causes him to drop blobs, but he could also just drop them by taking damage, and then like in League, picking them up would heal him. I think that's enough of a gimmick to make him a vanguard. Zed, this is your Genji, your Psylocke, makes sense to be a duelist. Zeri, AD carry with a gun, obviously also another duelist. However, I think she would actually be much more interesting in a game like this. Zeri's kit was inspired by shooters, in case you didn't know somehow. Like, you could make her Q just straight up her primary fire in a game like this. Her W is inspired by sniper rifles in games like Valorant or CSGO, so you could just turn it into an actual like mode that she can switch to, or like an ability that is basically like a shot from a Widowmaker or a Black Widow. Her E ability could literally just be a shift, causing her to run like Captain America, like Black Widow, like Soldier 76. Actually, now that I think of it, she could literally be Soldier 76. Ziggs. Definitely a duelist, he's all about blowing stuff up. I don't see him as a strategist, I don't see him as a vanguard. Zilean, I think we can make Zilean a strategist, right? Like, maybe his gimmick is that he can rewind you back in time, or at least rewind your health bar back in time. Maybe if you take damage, he can like revert some of that damage back by a percentage, something like that. I think you can make something interesting with Zilean as a strategist. His time bombs are obviously like area control, which is perfect. He can also like speed allies up, slow enemies down, send bombs to stun them. He has a revive ability. It makes sense to be a strategist. Alright, we are almost there. Zoe. Can we make Zoe a strategist? I don't think so. I think she's supposed to be a trickster, which is ironic because Loki is a support in League, but I don't see her healing. I don't think it's impossible though. She can put people to sleep, she can open portals, maybe, but I think she's more of a selfish character, especially in League. The portal is just for herself, the sleep is usually just a setup for her Q to hit. I think Duelist makes more sense for her. And finally, Zyra. Zyra is a hard one because you could easily turn Zyra into a strategist. Like, she's a plant-based character. You could give her some healing abilities, like some plants that heal. Maybe similar to Loki's rune. Maybe you could place a plant on the ground and then that plant would heal allies around it. In terms of character and lore, that doesn't make that much sense for Zyra, so I'm a bit on the fence. But then again, Loki as a healer makes no sense on the surface, but it actually works decently well in game. I think I'm putting Zyra as a strategist, but I do believe she could work as a duelist and maybe even as a vanguard. If you like increased her size a lot, like make her huge, she could be a vanguard as well. But I think strategist makes the most sense. Alright, so this is the final list. I'm looking around seeing if there's any champion I would change. I still think that Lysandra could be in any role. I think Jax could also be a vanguard. Same thing goes for Tryndamere, same thing goes for Swain. But I think overall I'm pretty satisfied with this list. Again, bunch of characters that could be in another role, especially the strategists, right? A lot of these are not healers, are not supports in League, but if I didn't put them here, this roster would be just mainly duelists. So I had to be a little bit creative. So my question to you is, do you agree with this list? Which champions do you think would fit better in another role than the one that I chose them for? And here's a little challenge. Choose a vanguard or duelist character from this list and place them in strategist in a way that makes sense. I've said Lysandra. Lysandra could work in my opinion, so that doesn't count, but you can pick any other one. Alright, that was it for this video. If you enjoy this type of content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. I'm Twisted and I'll see you guys in the next one.